You just might not have your video on there, John.
I think you're right. I just got to figure out where I hit the wrong button. Now I don't have a screen, so.
We're getting there. Okay, Aaron, you want to pass the host back over to me?
Yes. Man.
Awesome.
All right, everyone, there we go. We should be good to go.
Thank you, Aaron.
Yes. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
You too.
Bye.
Okay, you know the old saying, better late than never.
That's right.
I'd like to welcome you all. My name is Tom Firth. I'm the chair of the Essex Region Source Protection Committee, and this is our February meeting, streaming live for all those people out there who might want to watch it. I'd like to welcome everybody to the meeting. We have a full boat here in terms of members. Two proxies. Bill Dukes has a proxy by Jim Drummond, and Jean-Marc Beneteau is, Ron Barrett is his proxy. It says Albert Dion will be late. Is Albert here? Let me see. Oh, there's John's picture.
Albert is here, yes.
Yeah, sorry, I was able to make it right on time.
Oh, okay. It's a big.
Thank you.
There's a lot of people up here to scan, so I apologize for that. And John Barnett finally made his way in. So welcome to you all. I'm trying to get, because the members are interspersed with the guests, I'm trying to figure out who's who here. So Lisa Pavin, I'd like to welcome her to our meeting. She's doing the administrative duties for us tonight, and I think ongoing from now on, I guess. So we welcome Lisa. Welcome to the group. Samantha Dundas is with us. Samantha, someplace. I don't know. I need a bigger screen. I need another screen. I welcome Samantha. She's going to provide assistance on the technical work and is currently working on getting information for the annual report. You guys may or may not have heard that that Tim Burney has been named the new full-time general manager of the Conservation Authority, and the board chair, the new board chair, is Tanya Jobin from Tecumseh, hooray Tecumseh, and vice chair is Kieran McKenzie. I think he's from Windsor, I would expect. Erin Corstine is attending, your new manager of Science and Regulatory Affairs at the Greenhouse Growers. Top left corner. Number one. He's number one already. He will be replacing Justine Taylor after the middle of April, I guess, when the SBA makes the appointments. Kevin Webb, Manager of Environmental Quality, who will introduce himself later. He will replace Ian Wilson. Ian Wilson is with us tonight, so Kevin is just trying to get a handle on what goes on in these meetings. They'll be appointed in April. Olga is with us. Welcome, Olga, from the Ministry of the Environment. Olga is there somewhere. You guys don't move around, okay? Victoria is called in with an emergency. I hope it isn't COVID related. From the health unit, Larry Verbeek from the SPA, representative from SPA. Warren Higgins is not here, although it says he's going to be. And he's from Aqua. He might jump in later. Lastly, but not least, Heather Crew is with us. You've met Heather before. She's attended several meetings of the committee, and tonight she's going to give us a presentation on road salt management. So we welcome you, Heather. As far as what's going on in the provincial milieu. There will be another chairs meeting on the 24th of February. It's a teleconference again. They're still not meeting face to face. The chairs have some displeasure with that, but that's the way it is. So that's what's happening. So we will be meeting. We will be meeting on the 24th, and it's a fairly short meeting. It's about an hour, but each region is chairs are supposed to get together and make a presentation about what's going on in their collective area. So I'm meeting with the chairs from Southwest by Zoom, likely, to get something together. And hopefully the project managers will help us with the visuals, or we might have to lean on Aaron. Okay, so that's it for my welcome and comments. Katie, there's a land acknowledgement. Do you have that?
I do. Yep. Yeah. So we will start our meeting by acknowledging that the land we're on in Windsor, Essex, is a traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of the First Nations, comprised of the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi peoples. We value the significant historical and contemporary contributions of local First Nations and all of the original peoples of Turtle Island, North America, who've been living and working on the land.
Okay, thank you, Katie. So with that, is there any disclosure of conflict of interest from anyone? And seeing nothing. The agenda was pre-circulated. We have a motion on the agenda for tonight's meeting by Tim and Ron. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay. Not opposed, right, Chris?
No, sorry.
You got to be quick. Okay. Minutes were pre-circulated, minutes from October 14th. Any addition, deletion, correction? Motion? Matthew? And John? All right. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. In the correspondence, there's a letter from a letter to Pat Hinch, Manager of Source Protection Programs Branch at MECP, re cannabis operations in the Essex Region Source Protection Area. That's there for your knowledge. So, motion to receive that correspondence. John Barnett and Jim Drummond. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Getting your exercise on that one arm anyways, guys. Source Protection Authority information was sent for their meeting on September 10th. So that motion for that is to receive. Albert Dion and Nelson Santos. All in favor? Okay, you're getting tired already. Thank you. Carried.
Chair Tom,
Yes, sir.
just one correction, actually. The date for the meeting is listed as 2019,
Oh,
not 2020.
okay. Lisa, you got that? I think that's their minutes, so I'm not sure. We just note that and refer it to their secretary, please, or their manager. Okay, so we're down to the liaisons update, and Olga is with us. Welcome, Olga.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you guys hear me okay like this?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I just wanted to provide two brief updates today. Katie asked me to speak a little bit about, firstly, the Conservation Authorities Act and some of the sort of the current status of that work with the ministry. So just, this will be, of course, very familiar to many of you, but as you know, the province passed the changes to the Conservation Authorities Act early December of 2020. And these changes were about ensuring that there's more consistency and transparency across conservation authorities, and focusing CAs on their core mandate. And if you recall, the sort of the areas of those mandated activities or programs or services are protecting people and property from natural hazards, the conservation and management of CA-owned land, and their role in source water protection under the Clean Water Act. So the province is moving forward with implementing those changes since they did receive royal assent in December. And that includes, as you likely would have heard, working out the details of this series of proposed regulations that would implement those changes to the Conservation Authorities Act. So just to, very briefly, that includes regulations on really the details of the mandatory programs and services that CAs would be required to provide and that they can levy municipalities for without agreement, how to transition to a new funding model, and also how local members of communities can participate in CAs through the Community Advisory Board. So to that end, the province has created a new working group consisting of so the Conservation Authority representatives, a member representing AMO, so the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, and Conservation Ontario. And there are also, as I understand, other subject matter experts on the working group. And the group is, of course, supported by staff from MECP and MNRF. And the intent for the group is really to provide input to the government to inform these upcoming regulatory proposals. And as I understand, those regulations will also be available for public consultation on the Environmental Registry of Ontario in the near future. So there would be, of course, an opportunity to review and comment on the proposals for the general public. I know in terms of how that really relates more directly to source water protection, because I understand there have been questions about that. Now that it's a mandatory area that CAs can levy municipalities for without an agreement. What I can say on that front is the province is continuing to provide funding to CAs to support all of their obligations and responsibilities as source protection authorities under the Clean Water Act. And as you know, there's always been sort of an annual commitment of funding rather than a longer term funding commitment, but the province provided funding for this fiscal year, which of course is coming to a close in a couple of months. And as Katie will well know, we're in discussions now with conservation authorities to finalize the agreements and the funding commitments for next fiscal year. Katie also asked me, if you recall at the last meeting, I believe Katie went over some of the proposed changes that the province is making to the director technical rules under the Clean Water Act. That our proposal for those director technical rules was posted on the Environmental Registry of Ontario for 90 days. It closed on November 9th. So as I understand from our technical staff who are reviewing the comments, the majority of them are technical in nature, and there were a few comments related to how those director technical rules impact the policy or the program. So we're currently reviewing all those comments and of course considering the feedback in full to see whether that should, if there is a need to amend any of the proposal that was posted. And I think really that's sort of as much of an update as I can give. As I understand, there's really at this point not a date that I can point to or a timeline for when we would expect those to be posted on the Environmental Registry as final. So of course I will keep, if that should happen, before the next committee meeting, Katie will and Chair Firth will be well aware of that. Otherwise I can provide an update at the next meeting. So those are really the two updates.
There, works better when the mute is off. Thank you, Olga. Thank you for that. Are there any questions from any of the committee members for Olga? Or Katie? Katie gets her questions in another way, I think. Yeah, I hear you saying that the first that we'll be able to see actual documents will be when they appear on the registry. There isn't any draft of any of this available.
For the Conservation Authorities Act?
Yeah.
That's correct. My understanding is it would be upon release of the proposal on the registry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you tell us the people who have been asked to comment or provide input? Can you give us an idea who they might be?
I'm sorry, I don't have that information, but I would suggest I can certainly reach out, or we have a dedicated email account in our branch for the team that administers the Conservation Authorities Act, and that is ca.office@ontario.ca. That may be a good venue to ask any additional questions, such as the composition. But at this point, all I know is that I believe it's the core group of CAs, as well as the representative from AMO and CO, are about 10 members altogether. And then there are additional stakeholders or subject matter experts that are invited to participate. But I think that core group is about 10.
Okay, thanks. I see Katie nodding her head, so she's probably got the names.
I don't know all the names. I know I'm pretty sure it's the general manager from Credit Valley, I think is Credit Valley Conservation Authority. I think that he's on there. So there are some strong Conservation Authority members, municipalities. I believe there's some industry representatives as well. So like developers and stuff. So it is a small group of people, but diverse.
Yeah, the reason I'm kind of interested, or particularly interested, is that this is one of the things that I'm hearing on the ground. People's dissatisfaction with some of the elements of what has been proposed. So I want to make sure that I keep up to date on the official stuff.
Yeah.
So if you can give us an idea when, Katie, make sure that you give us an idea when it does appear on the registry, so we can get.
Sure, I will do, and I will also, Lisa, if you can actually make note in the minutes, and then I will have to remember to do it. Anything that comes across my desk from CELA with the Canadian Environmental Law Association, I'll make sure that I'm circulating that to the SPC as well. They're doing a really good job of holding public webinars where they're really explaining exactly what will happen as a result of Schedule 6 and where that where those changes fall. And even for us as Conservation Authority staff, that's been one of my best resources, is through the Canadian Environmental Law Association, who are taking a very active role in trying to figure out exactly what this means for conservation authorities. And one of my outstanding questions that I think just will take a little bit more time to figure out is how this changes the process of source water. And so there's a process in place when a new project is proposed, where a project goes through planning and permitting. And what we know is that now we can have these minister zoning orders, which have existed in the past, but may be used more frequently going forward. And we know when we have an MZO that a conservation authority will need to issue a permit because they will be required to do so. What's not clear is whether that will have an impact on the source water process and on the Section 59 screening process, and whether we'll still be able to. It won't necessarily have a big impact for us here in the Essex region, but it could in other regions have an impact if we're not catching those activities that could cause a potential threat to drinking water if it's being pushed forward through a minister zoning order. So those are some of our outstanding questions that legal teams need to work through and try to figure out what the impact is.
Yeah, I can thank you, Katie, and I can give Olga a heads up. There might be something said about that at the chair's meeting from the Southwest group. Okay. So thank you very much. Are there any other questions from committee members for Ola? Seeing none. Okay. So Heather, welcome. Just for the committees, we've done this before, I think, but Heather, I want to just introduce you to the committee sort of more officially. You're going to give us a presentation, Walking a Tightrope, Road Salt Management Here and Now. Said Heather moved to Kingsville after retiring from her role as Manager of Professional Development and Training for the Good Roads Association of Ontario. She served on a committee with ERSPA alumni Chitra Gowda and other members of Conservation Ontario and the ministry to understand how road salt can and should be managed in vulnerable areas, and she remains involved in this work in her retirement. And we're lucky to have you with us in Essex. So with that, Heather, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Appreciate some time on the agenda here. And so thank you to the chair and to the committee members for allowing me to share a little bit about what I've learned over the years about the municipal, particularly winter operations and road salt. I feel like I've spent so much time in road salt. I think if you added alum, I'd probably crunch. All right, I'm gonna try and share my screen. This is always the fun part. All righty. This up and.
Oh, wait, sorry. Okay, you should be good to do it.
Uh-oh, now I've lost. Now I've lost me. Hang on just a sec. This is
good practice, but
yeah, it's just trying to get the Zoom part and the and the presentation part up at the same time. So let me go back to here. Oh, now I'm in trouble. Oh, why isn't it doing that?
we can still see and hear.
You can still see me. You know what? I'm just going to walk through the presentation, then I'll worry about the Zoom part after, okay?
Yes.
Okie dokie. Okay. Everybody's good? You can see what's on the screen?
No, we cannot see your presentation.
Oh, uh-oh.
Did you do the share screen?
I did.
Heather, if you pull your cursor down to the bottom so the scroll bar pops up, you'll probably see a thing that looks like a camera in a blue.
Yeah. Oh, there we are. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's share screen. And then, okie dokie.
There we go.
All right. Are you seeing all the stuff on the side though? Or
Yeah,
is it?
Yeah, so if you just start your slideshow, you should be good to go.
Okie dokie. This stuff's going to be the death of us, you know.
It allows us to do so many cool things, but there's
set up slideshow, record present online. No. From the beginning. I'm just going to go from the beginning. All right. Does that work? Yay.
Yep, perfect.
All right. Can you see the sign to the right-hand side of the screen?
Yes.
Okay. That I took on the east end of Kingsville, so not too far from where I live. It's posted on County Road 20. And is one of several I found in this area that designate or at least alert people to the fact that there are certainly some drinking water protection zones right here. And so I thought it appropriate to include that. And so what I'm going to talk about for the next few minutes is to give you, in some cases, it'll be a reminder. In some cases, it might be a little bit of new information, but I wanted to share some of the concerns about road salt for the last at least 25 years and give you a bit of context as to how we got to where we are today, some of the advancements that have been made. And the title of my presentation is reference to the tightrope that particularly municipalities walk between trying to be true to their environmental stewardship responsibilities and to try to walk the fine line in terms of managing their legal obligations and risk management. So that's what that's where the title came from, and it's not an easy tightrope. Okay, so what you're looking at is a geothermal map of a public works yard, and the red zones that you see around the salt dome, a little bit in front of the admin building and the storage shed, those are areas of intense salt permeation of the ground. And what's even more alarming is you can see, all right, we've got the boundaries well marked of what constituted the works yard, but it's all this stuff down at the bottom of the image, which indicates that the salt is permeating and leaching into areas well beyond the boundaries of the public works yard. And it's trying to find a way to get to groundwater, and is certainly going to be affecting the neighbors' yards and water quality. I don't know if there's a wellhead anywhere in the vicinity, but certainly it would be affected by what you're seeing on the screen. Long before the Clean Water Act and the terrible tragedies in Walkerton that led to the Clean Water Act, Environment Canada had road salt on their radar back in the late 90s, mid 90s, and a very extensive study was done. And as you might expect, road salt was identified as being toxic to the environment, to freshwater ecosystems, soil, vegetation, wildlife habitat, and something had to be done. Well, you can't just ban road salt outright. Unfortunately, we live in a country where the winter is a fact of our life for 5-6 months of the year in some cases, and we have an obligation to keep the roads safe. So the provincial and municipal road authorities got together with Environment Canada and said, we will use our best brains and come up with ways that we can do a better job of managing road salt. And so that's what was done. And so a code of practice for the environmental management of road salts came out in late 2003, 2004. And the group that put it together continues to this day to meet. There have been constant reviews of that. Environment Canada came out in 2014 with a set of national targets. So participation to adopt the code of practice is in fact voluntary. And Ontario's got a pretty good track record in terms of the number of, particularly municipal, but of the adoption of the code of practice. And so Environment Canada came out in 2014 with a new set of national targets. And the one of particular concern as we get to the latter part of my presentation is that they set 2024 as a target date for road authorities to come up with some means of dealing with their salt vulnerable areas. So the code applies to organizations that use more than 500 tons of road salt on a 5-year rolling average. So it's going to be your larger urban areas, but it also applies to organizations that have vulnerable areas that could be impacted by road salts. And with pretty much any municipality I can think of, there is surface water close by or aquifers that are going to be affected by road salt. So I can't think of any municipality, at least in Ontario, that isn't going to be affected by road salts or have identified vulnerable areas. So the code itself identifies a need for the road authorities to develop a salt management plan to address storage, salt storage, snow disposal, and salt applications. There is a report that's supposed to be sent in to Environment Canada in June of each year. And so ongoing monitoring should be taking place. And Environment Canada measures progress by those participating road authorities by things such as adopting computerized spreader controls in their winter maintenance fleet, pre-wetting salt before it's applied, anti-icing techniques, training of staff, and a number of other things. What I found really interesting is that the code itself does not address the use of salt used in parking lots. When the initial studies were done, it was thought that parking lot maintenance and winter maintenance and salt application probably only contributed less than 15% of the salt that's entering the environment. Turns out that's not true. It's far higher. So where you're seeing a lot of progress to manage salt in a more modern way with the road authorities at the municipal and provincial levels, I'm afraid parking lot management and salt applications is a bit of a Wild West story, and probably everybody on the committee has been to a parking lot in the winter, say of a mall or what have you, and there's so much salt laced down that it's almost like walking on ball bearings to get to the front doors. It's insane how much salt is used. There is a group trying to address that through Landscape Ontario, but it's still, these are largely private operators or landscape folks who are looking for winter work, who are responsible for winter maintenance, and so there's a lot of work to be done on parking lot maintenance, but the code of practice does not get into that. It's only for recognized road authorities. So again, we talk about the balancing act, and my heart lies with the municipal sector particularly, but it's always a crazy thing to try and find that balance between the obligation to be stewards of the environment and the legal obligations under the Municipal Act to keep roads safe for the traveling public. And there is serious liability exposure. So I've quoted a couple spots within the Municipal Act that lay out the obligation for municipalities to keep the roads in a safe state of repair, and that they are liable under the Negligence Act for any damage because of any default or neglect of duty in keeping the roads safe. I would have to say, in my experience, in my observation, all municipalities in Ontario are definitely highly concerned with risk exposure and liability. The insurance premiums certainly don't go down. The number of claims, there have been studies shown that slip and fall claims for people who have fallen on, particularly on sidewalks, is astronomical. It's a pretty scary thing, and there are thousands, millions actually, of taxpayer dollars go to paying damages for claims levied against municipalities for winter maintenance types of activities. I know that the municipal sector, the municipal members of Ontario Good Roads said, you got to help us. And so Good Roads got together with the Ministry of Transportation and came out with a set of minimum maintenance standards in 2002. Every 5 years, those standards are reviewed, and they've been updated on a number of times to add sidewalks and various things over the years. There's also something worth mentioning, which is that every municipality adopts a local level of service that is approved by council. And I won't go into the weeds on that one, but what I can say is that the level of service is dictated by the classification of the road, and the roads are classified according to a combination of the posted speed limit and the traffic volume. And that level of then the response time to snow and ice events, what the time response is, and also what the depth of snow or ice. It can't go be, what those thresholds are, by which point the public works people have to have responded to the snow or ice event. The one that really spooks municipalities is the whole business of joint and several liability. And this one is just the spookiest thing ever. The short version of what that's about is that a defendant held just 1% liable for a plaintiff's injuries or damages may also have to pay 99% of the share of any other defendant who cannot afford to pay. So let me just try and put this in lay terms, hopefully not confusing you. So suppose Katie and I were in separate vehicles and we were cruising along County Road 20. And I was being an idiot and I was looking at my cell phone rather than paying attention. And perhaps the road was a little bit slick and I hit Katie's car, which is terrible. And Katie, still being a young woman with many years of working life still ahead of her, depending on the nature of her injuries, she's going to have some liability and insurance. I'm going to have some insurance. So collectively, we might have $2 million that might go toward paying for her, physical rehab or etc. But maybe that's not enough. And maybe the damages are in the neighborhood of $20 or $30 million. Well, the court looks around and says, well, clearly Heather hasn't got $30 million in her back pocket. So somebody's got to help pay for Katie's rehab and her loss of work, etc. Well, this happened on County Road 20. Essex County, they've got money. They can tax people. They have deep pockets. So that's in a nutshell where this joint and several liability. So even though it was my idiocy that was in looking at my cell phone instead of watching the road that was really the culprit here, because it happened on, in this case, a municipal or a county road particularly, that means that Essex County is going to be pulled in to help pay for the damages that I have inflicted on Katie. It's yeah, I don't even want to go into opinions about that, but that's what it's about. So you can see how municipalities get quite spooked by the whole concept of joint and several liability, and the Attorney General's office is adamant they have no interest whatsoever in revisiting or revising those terms. Okay, but I'll move on. So let's get on to managing the road salt business itself. So I want to focus on 3 areas particularly, the materials being used now, some of the technology being used and some of the advances there, and some of the training aspects that should be taking place within your public works team. So really, sodium chloride, your basic road salt, is the #1 product to use. It's plentiful. I mean, that's why we have natural gas here. We're sitting on a huge salt deposit. It's not called Windsor salt for nothing. And as a result, it's fairly inexpensive as a means of de-icing. You'll see it used in both solid and liquid form. As we're in this cold snap, though, it's useful to remember that once you get below about -12, your basic road salt isn't going to do much for you. It has its limitations. So that's when you want to look at some of the other products. And we already know about the environmental concerns with all chlorides. So some of the other options, magnesium chloride is used quite a bit, and quite often it's used to pre-wet salt before it's applied. Primarily, I've seen it used in liquid form. Sometimes in granular form, it's used mixed with sand to prevent freezing of the pile. And it's certainly used a lot in direct liquid application. And I'll talk about that in a minute. It has a much lower freezing temperature than sodium chloride, so it burns hot, as they say. Interestingly, it's corrosive to aluminum, so you got to be very careful to rinse off the equipment after an event, and it's certainly a lot more expensive than salt. Calcium chloride, now this is a real tricky one. It burns even hotter, so its freezing point is much lower even than magnesium chloride. Also used as a pre-wetting agent. Also used as direct liquid application on roads before an event. The tricky bit here is that it's hygroscopic and will absorb moisture from its surrounding. And as a result, you have to be very, very careful to monitor. If you're going to use calcium chloride, be very, very careful in monitoring the forecasted weather, particularly any upward movement in the temperatures, because if you have calcium chloride on the roads and the temperature then gets toward freezing or above freezing point, then it is slick like you would not believe. I won't even tell you what the road people say it's like. Some of the other things that are interesting, there's a whole bunch of agricultural based materials that, well, one of the things they found is that sugar, when added to salt, lowers the freezing point of salt. I don't know why sugar does that, but it does. So I've seen all kinds of things used. Sugar beets is certainly one of the more popular ones, but I've seen beer mash, whiskey mash. I think they've tried just about everything but peanut butter and jelly on the roads at some point over the last number of years. Potassium acetate is used, MTO uses it on the overpasses, freeway bridges, etc. And of course, airports use it to keep runways from freezing. It's really expensive, so it's used very, very sparingly and judiciously. Potash is something that's used mostly in Western provinces, and it's a naturally occurring product. So it does have quite a few chlorides in it, but the mix of which chlorides is a bit inconsistent. You never know, but it's certainly used a lot. It's a very fine type of granule, more so than road salt. Okay, I can remember years back when I first started with Good Roads, more than 25 years ago. I can remember going to works yards and you'd see piles of salt outside and they'd just be covered with big old tarps and have a few tires weighing them down. But basically the surface of the works yard would be unpaved and you just have these ginormous piles of salt loosely covered with tarp. It was a horror story. Now there's I can't remember the last time I saw that happen. Now salt is stored inside. The floor of the salt domes is generally concrete. Usually the salt domes are big enough that the spreaders can be loaded on the inside, which is also good, helps to contain. And the work staff are certainly encouraged to adopt good housekeeping practices where any excess salt after a truck's been loaded gets swept back into the pile, and any runoff of water around the salt dome is controlled and put through a oil and grit filter. Unfortunately, you can't once you've got salt in water, you can't get it out other than through distillation. I keep hoping somebody will come up with a way to use something like, say, a marine distillation process in a works yard. I mean, they do it on boats that are in the ocean. They can purify water. So it could be done. It's just nobody seems to have bothered with it. Anyway, let's move on to the technology. So a couple areas I wanted to look at here would be some of the equipment that's now being used. As I mentioned earlier, it's really important to forecast and monitor the road and weather conditions. And I wanted to talk a little bit about anti-icing. Okay, so one of the things that's been studied quite extensively is if you just apply dry road salt, what happens? And the fact of the matter is that it bounces off to the side. So you're losing more than half of what you're putting down is bouncing off to the side of the road or into the ditches. Not good. What you want to do is wet it so that it stays where it's dropped. At least a lot more of it, almost 80% is going to stay where it's dropped. And by wetting it as it's dropped, it means that the road salt is being activated. The dry salt itself doesn't melt anything. It's only after it dissolves and you have a solution that you actually start to work on the lowering the freezing temperature. So really important to pre-wet the salt to keep it where it's supposed to go and to activate it. So I wanted to show you a little bit of some of the modern equipment. A lot of municipalities particularly have the types of spreaders that have tanks on the sides. And in the tank will be either salt brine, or it'll be a magnesium chloride mix or something like that. And so then as the salt is dropped from the hopper, then before it hits the spinner, it's being sprayed by the solution from these tanks. The other thing that's important is that inside the cab of these snowplows and spreaders is things look pretty spooky. It's almost like you're in the cockpit of a jet engine. You've got computerized controls that are controlling the amount that's put down, and it's also recording when and where and how much is being put down. So you have a really accurate readout of the amount of salt that's being applied and where and when, which is very useful for legal defense if it comes to that, but also in terms of knowing where your salt is going from what you ordered to what you applied. Really important to wash the vehicles after any storm event, and that be done inside. You also want to make sure you capture that wash water and run it through an oil grit separator. Equally important is, again, going back to these computerized controls, you want to make sure that the calibration of the equipment is very accurate. So this is a process that has to take place before the beginning of the winter season. So that's usually done in October for most municipalities. And if there's any maintenance, particularly on the hydraulics of any of the equipment, it's really important that you recalibrate just to make sure that your readout is still accurate in terms of how much is being applied. This is an interesting little piece of equipment that's been used for the last number of years. This is on the driver's side mirror of a salt truck. And what it's doing is, from this little sensor down here, it's reading the temperature of the pavement. Not a lot of point in putting down salt if you're well above the freezing point, but this is fairly simple but an important piece of equipment that's been used for a while now, these infrared thermometers. I think most municipalities are now subscribed to some sort of weather service or meteorological service. This will give you a very accurate forecast of any weather systems moving in and what to anticipate by way of timing and type of precipitation, so you can get out ahead of that and pre-treat the roads. I also know from my knowledge and familiarity with so many of the road managers that they also talk to each other. And so if you know that a system's moving in from Michigan, as they often do, these Colorado lows will come in and come at us through Michigan and Ohio and Indiana, that you talk to your next door neighbor and find out, okay, well, the precipitation was expected to hit at about 4 o'clock. How are things looking in your area, and what are you seeing? And so they do talk to each other, because that's much more immediate, but is also pretty accurate. Now, here's something interesting. As I was on Highway 3, just a little bit west of Highway 77, I found an RWIS tower. What's an RWIS tower, you may ask? And that tower is just jam-packed with all kinds of telemetrics and radar and all kinds of instrumentation that is reading what the road and weather conditions are at a specific site. There's quite a few of these towers along, usually they're on the north side of the 401. You'll find them right from one end of the 401 to the other. Under the ground, right across from the tower, buried in the pavement, you'll find these pucks. And there's a little divot here that's reading whether or not there's any chemical on the road. And if there is chemical, then you're going to find out if there's enough there to prevent any black ice or frost. No point putting salt down where you already have an adequate amount. And then below the ground, because they're buried down about 16 inches or thereabouts, it's also reading the subsurface temperatures. So is the below ground temperature such that, again, you're apt to get frost, in which case you want to make sure that there is some kind of chemical on the road to keep the roads safe. So yeah, if you haven't seen it and you're happen to find yourself on Highway 3 just a little bit west of Leamington, look for that tower on the north side. It's about 2 kilometers from Highway 77. So anti-icing and de-icing. Anti-icing is when you apply a chemical, a de-icing chemical, before you know a storm is coming in. And what you're trying to do is keep the snow or ice from bonding to the pavement. Kind of like putting cooking spray or butter in a pan before you fry an egg. It's just so much harder to get the plow down to bare pavement if the snow or ice has been allowed to bond. And what will force it to bond is the traffic running over it. So much better if you've got some sort of surface there, a chemical surface that's going to prevent that from happening. Really good to prevent the formation of black ice and frost. And you're going to be able to get back to safe driving conditions much, much faster than if you don't. So it's a very proactive measure. In olden times, what we would do is plow, and then you'd put your salt down after, either during or after the storm. But by then the snow has already had a chance to bond to the pavement. And so it means the roads are in a more hazardous state for a much longer period of time. It's a very reactive sort of approach. So here's an anti-icing truck. You can see these pencil nozzles in behind the brine that's being put down. So you've probably seen, particularly on Highway 3 or the 401, you'll see these stripes before an event. So that means that the road has been treated before an event that's anticipated. And that can be done even several days ahead of an event. Training is another important part. You keep in mind for the works staff, it's probably been 6 months, 7 months since they were in a snowplow. So it's good to go through a refresher, how the controls, and you saw how complex the controls can be in the cabs of these machines. How to handle the machine. It's a very heavy, awkward vehicle, especially when it's loaded. So good to get them refreshed on that and remind them about salt management practices. Don't, for example, leave the spinner running when you come to an intersection, so that you just end up with this pile of salt that's not doing anybody any good. You also want to make sure that the snowplow routes are carefully planned, so that you know the maximum distance that a loaded spreader can go from the works yard before they have to come back and refill. We always encourage snowplow operators to dry run their routes in the pre-season. Again, October's usually when this happens. Become familiar with their routes, note any obstacles, tight turns, turnaround points, etc. So that brings me toward the latter part here, and the project that goes back to the beginning, where I mentioned that Environment Canada is looking for road authorities to have some sort of plan within a couple of years. They've only got 3 years left to have a plan for how they're going to conduct their winter maintenance operations within salt vulnerable areas. And so about a year before I retired, I reached out to Conservation Ontario and said, would you be interested in working with us at Good Roads to see if we can come up with some means of addressing these salt vulnerable areas? And my gosh, they responded within 10 minutes. And as Tom mentioned in the introduction, I had the great pleasure of working with Chitra Gowda, who's so well known to you, as my co-chair on this project. So this was released, this set of guidelines was released in 2018 and is still available if any municipalities want to access it, and certainly something for this committee to be aware of. So I won't go into the details of it. You're welcome to access that, but a couple things I wanted to bear in mind. If you say, well, what is a salt vulnerable area? The answer that you, as the Source Water Protection Committee, might be very different from the answer that Environment Canada might offer. Their definition is very broad and includes not only drinking water, but habitat, agriculture, plant and animal habitat, wetlands. It's very, very broad. Whereas obviously in the province of Ontario, the emphasis is more on threats to drinking water quality. we had fun trying to figure out how to tackle this whole project. And after a couple meetings, it finally became clear that the toughest areas for any kind of source water protection is those areas that are identified as issue contributing, where there's already been chloride detected in the drinking water. Now, there aren't as many, thankfully, ICAs. So this seemed like a good starting point. This is the toughest of the tough in terms of salt vulnerable areas, and it's a manageable number. So if we can figure out how to crack that nut, then the wellhead protection and other areas are going to be a little easier because we've already tackled the most difficult. So the reason this document is called Good Practices is because at the time of publication, those were the best practices currently available, but technology continues to evolve very, very quickly. And we also had to recognize that not all municipalities have access to the same resources. So you needed to offer a range of options for municipalities to address their salt vulnerable areas, and then select the practices that are the best fit for them. But there's always that safety for the traveling public that has to be kept in top of mind. So some of the solutions that we offered, some of the range, section 3 of the booklet offers operational details, but it's also important that the public be aware of areas that are vulnerable to road salts. Good to get the private sector. So going back to the parking lot management and parking lot maintenance, there is a certification that Landscape Ontario endorses called the Smart About Salt certification that you're probably aware of. One of the quick things you can do as a road authority is to reduce the speed limit. Going back to how the level of services is calculated based on posted speed limits and traffic volume. If you lower the speed limit within these ICA zones, then it means that the level of service is going to be reduced slightly. And so your salt application can also be positively affected. And also, we've got to keep advocating for a more fair and just system in our courts, particularly with respect to joint and several liability. Maybe there's another way of addressing damages. So the project goes on to this day. Phase 2 is going to look at intake protection zones and wellhead protection. Phase 3, as it goes on, would be looking at any other areas that have been delineated under the Clean Water Act, where road salt plays a role. And so that's it. There we go. If you have any questions, I don't want to take up more time on the agenda. Please feel free to email me, and I'll be happy to try and answer your questions or direct you to people who know more current information. So I thank you for your time.
We'll give you a virtual applause. Thank you, Heather. And where this will become much more relevant for this committee is in these director technical rules that Olga mentioned. There are going to be some changes to where the storage and application of road salt is considered a significant drinking water threat. So we have not, as a committee, needed to really be concerned about it because the thresholds were very, very high. But we will be in a position where we need to consider road salt storage and application, at least in our IPZ1s, as a significant drinking water threat. So this is really great background information for us to know as we prepare to sort of get into that process of policy development if we have to do it. Heather, I have a question for you. Thinking personally about like my own salt use at my own house and my driveway, what's the best, do you know what the best environmental choice is that I can make?
Well, let me get out of this one.
Probably a shovel.
Yeah, there we go. Gee.
Like I usually don't.
Shovel. Mechanical means shovel it.
Shovel it, yes.
So yes, it works. Labor intensive, but it works. So, golly, just be very judicious with your, I mean, you know as well as I do that anything you introduce to an environment that doesn't occur naturally is potentially negatively going to affect an environment. So you have to keep your driveway and your walkways safe. You do have people delivering mail and parcels and so forth and so on. So you do have to be conscious of that. You don't want somebody to sue you because they tripped on your walkway. But yeah, just be careful about how much you put down. And yeah, there are some products that claim to be more environmentally friendly than others. But again, if you come right down to it, if it's got chloride in it,
All the same.
it's not going to be a happy thought in your environment. So just only put down no more than you absolutely have to.
Awesome. Thank you, Heather. And I will encourage you as well, if you're on Twitter, there is the Source Water Communications Group has put together these Winter Wednesdays. So on Wednesdays, there's a tweet that goes out from Conservation Ontario, and the Essex Region Conservation Authority tends to retweet them. So that is all about proper salt management and snow removal. So if you're on Twitter, keep your eye out for that. They use the hashtag SourceWater Ontario, so SourceWater on. Yeah, and if you're on them, then retweet them as our committee and sort of help spread the word about responsible salt use.
Okay, thanks very much. Does anybody else on the committee wish to ask a question of Heather? Albert?
Yeah, sorry, not so much a question, but you're almost in a catch-22, right? If you go to flush a hydrant or something, you don't have a biosulfite puck or something inside a diffuser, you're in trouble. But then knowing the minimum maintenance standard as well, after that Giovanni case back in 2014, standard or not, like either way, you're going to get sued. So do you get sued for like millions of dollars, or do you get sued for like 10,000? It's a catch-22, but everybody wants them to be applying to the ministry regs, like two set of standards, but they both have to be right. So it's a pretty fine line, especially in this part of the country now with all the water we have. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Good comment. Anybody else? We're good? Okay, thank you very much, Heather. It was a great presentation, and we're all learned people about salt.
My pleasure. Okay, I'm going to put myself back on mute.
Thank you, Heather.
Okay, Katie, you're up.
No, you skipped over Olga. So Olga's got her presentation about the 2019.
Sorry. I'm sorry, Olga. I thought you were finished. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. And I will share my screen. This is my first time doing it on Zoom. I hope it works. Share sound.
Oops.
So can you let me know what you see? Do you see the 2019 annual? You do. Okay, perfect. Okay, so can you see this as I'm switching slides?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you. So I will warn you that this is that this may appear a little dry by comparison to Heather's presentation, which was far more dynamic, but I will do my best not to bog you down with the numbers, but really the hope is to give you a sense of the great progress that's been made in implementing the source protection plan policies that committees and municipalities have worked hard to put in place, and also highlight some areas of challenge. And just as a bit of context, maybe for those who are less aware, the Clean Water Act requires that bodies with implementing responsibilities, so that includes ministries, municipalities, and so on, they report annually by February 1st on the progress that they're making in implementing policies. So they report to the Source Protection Authority, and then the Source Protection Authority in turn reports to the ministry by May 1st of every year on the progress within their entire area or region. So our branch receives and analyzes that information to better understand the progress that's being made, and of course all of the, or some of the areas where implementing bodies are having challenges with implementation. So that's what we've done with the 2019 data. So this deck is it's just a summary or a roll-up to give you a sense of that progress. So you do have the whole deck. Actually, I don't know, Katie, that the committee has access to the entire deck. I can always make it available if you'd like, but it is very lengthy. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to highlight some of the key areas, but you're welcome to peruse it later if you'd like, and I can answer any questions about some of the other slides that I won't be addressing. So the first set of slides focus on policy and threat implementation progress. And you can see this full size, right? It's not too small on your screens. Okay, good. So, of course, one of the many measures that helps to inform the sense of progress in meeting plan objectives is the implementation status of the legally binding policies that address significant threats. So these are policies like land use planning, prescribed instruments, Section 57 prohibitions, risk management plans, among others. So that's what slide 4 is showing you. And you can see the breakup by region on the slide, and the information highlighted in yellow on the right side is the average across the province. So 98% of these policies are in the process of being implemented. So the slide also lets you compare the progress that's been made over the last 3 years from 2017 onward. And as you can see, all the regions support or report significant progress with these policies. So there's really no Source Protection Authority that has reported a high percentage of those legally binding policies as not making any progress, which is of course great news.
Olga, I'll just point out for the committee that we are in the Western region.
Thanks, Katie. So this next slide, slide 5, that shows the implementation status of non-binding policies. So as you recall, really the legal effect depends on the implementing body and the threat that's being addressed and the policy tool that you're using in the source protection plan to address it. So these are the non-binding policies that address significant drinking water threats. So 90% of these policies have been completely implemented or are in the process of being implemented. Again, you can see the breakup by the region as with the last slide, and the yellow highlighted number on the right is your total for the province. So like with the legally binding policies, the No Source Protection Authority is reporting any significant challenges or high number of non-legally binding policies that address significant threats as not making any progress. So from here, I will jump ahead to slide 8 on some of the implementation challenges. So implementing bodies are experiencing challenges or delays with a total of 21 low, moderate, and significant threat policies, as you see on the slide. So most of these, 17, are policies that address significant threats. So these include, just as an example of the type of policy tool they'd be using, this would be specify action policies, education and outreach, risk management plans, and incentive policies. And in reporting, source protection authorities do report on some of the reasons for the delays, and they have been attributed to a number of factors. So as an example, some of the policies are non-binding. In some cases, the implementing bodies are considering options for how to meet the intent of the policy, or in some cases, the activity is currently not zoned to occur on the landscape, so the policy is just not being prioritized at this time because of the lower risk. Oops. Okay, I'm going to go back, sorry. Okay. So this slide is showing you the progress that's been made in addressing significant threats in the province. So just to be clear, the distinction between the last slides, we're really talking about the number of policies that have been implemented, whereas this is talking about how many activities on the ground, significant threat activities, have actually been addressed as a result of implementing those policies. And it compares again the progress from 2017 to 2019. And in all cases but one, you can see that between 2018 and 19, progress was made to address additional threats than the total for the previous year. So overall, again, in the yellow part of the graph, that's your total for the province, with 83% of existing significant threats have been addressed across Ontario. And that's an increase of about 8% over the 2018 reporting year. The variation that you can see across the different regions in the province is due to a number of factors. For instance, as you may recall, not all plans came into effect at the same time. So depending on the complexity of the work in each region, each plan may have been approved by the minister at a really within several years of each other. So that means that the implementation timelines for the policies in that plan are also different across the regions because the clock starts from the effective date of that plan. Of course, there are some areas that have a very high number of existing threats, and because of that, they've had to prioritize, and policy implementation is a little bit behind. It's also good to note that the number of existing threats that need to be addressed is sort of a moving target from year to year. It's not a static number because source protection plans are evolving documents. And if you bring a new system online, or if you have changes to an existing system, then that might mean your vulnerable areas are shifting, or you have better science or something like that. So because of the change or the shift in the protection area, that might mean that you then capture existing threats that weren't captured before, and your number changes for that year. So that's why this number is a little bit tricky, but overall we're seeing progress. So the next section highlights part 4 implementation progress. So those are your risk management plan policies, your prohibition, and your restricted land uses. So on this slide, the focus is on risk management plans. So it's showing us that over 1,100 risk management plans are in place across Ontario. These RMPs are in place across just over 1,400 properties and address over 2,600 threat activities on the ground. So you can see by comparing the years that notable progress was made from one year to the next, and the total number of RMPs by the end of 2019 is about a 35% increase from 2018. So the next slide is still pertaining to section 57 and 58. So it's the compliance rate with the Part 4 policies. So in other words, are there people engaging in threat activities that should have a risk management plan but don't, or that shouldn't be engaging in the activity because it's prohibited through a section 57 policy in the local plan? And the compliance rate is reported as 94%. 6% of inspections revealed there was a contravention of section 58. So that's the risk management plan policy. So that just means, or not just, that means that people were engaging in a drinking water threat activity while an RMP still needed to be established. So this graph is showing you compliance with the actual content of an established RMP. So the difference being, are there folks who have an RMP? Are they implementing those measures? And all inspections conducted in 2019 showed a 100% compliance rate with the risk management plans that had been established. So there are quite a few slides about the progress that provincial ministries are making in implementing those policies that target the prescribed instruments. So I'm just going to highlight one or two of them. So slide 15. So all 9 ministry program areas that issue prescribed instruments, so this would include an environmental compliance approval or a nutrient management strategy, they reported having processes in place to ensure source protection is considered in those instruments. So you'll be able to see the exact 9 program areas on an upcoming slide, but some of the processes that the ministries have reported in implementing source protection includes training staff, developing guidance documents on how to integrate source protection into their various approvals, mapping and tracking instruments that are subject to plan policies, and also ensuring that they're screening those incoming applications so that if something is in a vulnerable area, they can determine whether it's in fact a significant drinking water threat activity, and then in turn, whether they need to add terms and conditions to that instrument to make sure that the threat is being adequately managed. So this slide gives you it's a very quick snapshot of the overall progress made on ensuring incoming applications are screened for source water protection. So by incoming, we mean these are new applications like an ECA or like a nutrient management strategy, as I mentioned before. So you can see that in 2019, a total of 264 applications were screened for source protection considerations. And that brought the cumulative total of all the applications that had been screened up to that date to just over 1,000. Nearly 3/4 of all of these incoming applications were confirmed not to be a significant threat, and therefore they didn't require a decision on how to manage the risk. Because as you can imagine, just because you're in a high scoring vulnerable area doesn't mean that you necessarily meet the circumstances in our tables of drinking water threat. So there's that additional assessment that has to be done. So again, over 1,000 applications had been screened in total because they were occurring in a vulnerable area. 260 were assessed as a significant threat, and in all cases but one, the threat was managed through terms and conditions. And in that other one case, it was prohibited. Okay. So I'm just going to move right past some of these slides in the interest of time. Let's see. So the next several slides highlight some of the progress that municipalities and source protection authorities are making in implementing plan policies. So as you can see on slide 21, 94% of municipalities that are impacted by policies have incorporated or are in the process of incorporating source protection into their official plans. And this is an increase of 5% from the 2018 year. 5% of municipalities have not begun, with CTC and Quinte reporting the highest percentage of their subject municipalities as not having yet started. And again, the differences in progress have been attributed to a number of factors. So for municipalities in Central Region, for instance, they've reported that they're aligning their source protection conformity exercise with the timing of their OP conformity with the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. Other reasons include the number of municipalities affected by land use planning policies, the complexity of the policies that need to be incorporated, and then of course the availability of resources to undertake that conformity exercise. So I'll skip to this, ties in a little bit of with Heather's presentation at the beginning about signage. So this is shows you the progress that was made in implementing the signage policies. So just over 1,700 source protection signs have been installed across source protection regions over the years. And this included 128 signs on provincial highways and over 1,500 signs on municipal roads. So this slide is dedicated to septic systems. So as you know, as a bit of background, the Ontario Building Code requires that septic systems that are a significant threat be inspected every 5 years. So the blue bar on the graph represents the number of septic systems that required inspection, and the red bar is the number of septic systems for which the inspections were completed. The variation in the inspections is due to the fact that on an annual basis, a portion of the total number of on-site sewage systems need to be inspected because they're all on a different 5-year cycle. And this shows the same information as slide 25, but as a percentage. So 21% of on-site sewage systems that are a significant threat were inspected in 2019. And it's a little bit of a, I find a bit of a misleading figure because again, that doesn't take into account that's not to say that all of those needed to be inspected in that year because they need to be inspected within a 5-year time frame. Okay, and so sorry, let me see. Okay, so this slide still about septic systems. It's showing that of the inspections that were completed in 2019, 91% didn't require any maintenance. 6% required minor maintenance, and 3% required major maintenance. And as I understand the specific actions for how this is performed, and really the resulting actions are at the authority's discretion. So it may start with a less invasive visual inspection and then go to a pump out or more in-depth camera inspection and repairs. And I will finish up on slide 30. As you can see on the slide, all but 2 source protection committees indicated in their annual reports that actions are progressing well or on target towards achieving the objectives of their plan. So of course, as you're aware, that's something you as a committee also do for your public-facing annual report. So that's all but 2 are reporting that they are progressing well or on target towards achieving the plan. So that's a 5% increase from 2018. And of course, we hope to see that rise to 100% over time. So I'll stop there. I'm happy to take any questions you may have now or after taking another look if you're interested.
Awesome. Thanks, Olga. And again, this is timely because at our next meeting in March, we will be hearing about the specific 2020 annual reporting progress for the Essex region that will then roll up into these provincial numbers that Olga will present to us again next year from across the whole province.
Okay. Any questions for Olga? Actually, Olga, I'm curious about the septic system results that you see there. You said something about the authorities responsible for the inspections, but I think that's up to the municipality, right?
And sorry, yes, and I just meant whichever authority, whether that's the health unit or the municipality, depending on what region you're in. I think in some of the northern regions, the health unit does those inspections, septic inspection systems for the municipality. Yes, so not the source protection authority.
And the follow-up question would be, where are the areas where this is a requirement? Is there a map or something of that?
So all septic systems that are a significant threat under our framework require an inspection every 5 years. So it would be, Katie, I imagine that's not the case, that it doesn't meet the threat in your region, so it doesn't apply. But in others, I don't quite remember what the threshold for the score of a vulnerable area would be, but if they're in a certain vulnerable area with a high enough score and meet the circumstance, or if they're in an ICA for a contaminant that can be contributed by a septic system, then they would be a significant threat, and then they would have to be on that 5-year cycle of being inspected.
Okay, I can do my own research, I guess, on that then. Thank you.
And septic systems are not a significant drinking water threat in the Essex region.
No, I know that. I'm just wondering where they are and why. Anyway.
Albert had his hand raised there.
Heather?
Albert.
No, I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry, just a quick question to Olga. So that 3% for the major repair, would that be like considered a spill or?
I don't think so. I think that's, I mean, it's a good question, and I'm not sure what the criteria were to classify something as a major repair.
I figured something that would fail like that would be a reportable spill action center or whatever, if it's like effluent or whatever, raw sewage. Just a question, thanks.
Yep.
Anybody else? Ian.
Just a quick question. I may have missed this. Were the presentations distributed?
No, they were not, but I will, Olga's I can distribute, and Heather, if you're okay with it, with sending me your slides, I can distribute that as well.
Yeah, if you can, that would be appreciated.
I'm watching to see if Heather's nodding her head or not.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, have I missed anything else, Katie?
No, now it's my turn.
Okay, you're up.
Okay, now let's see if I can share my screen successfully. Okay. So oops. Oh, that's not, nope. See, I failed. We're all having some troubles. I have been joined by two young ladies who think I can't see them behind the couch. So you can see my slide deck now, right? You can see our okay. Can you see the Peely Island truck?
Absolutely.
All right. Great.
We're seeing the presentation notes.
Dang it. What if I go? Ugh. It's so frustrating when things don't work exactly how they're supposed to. I know. Ba-ba-dum. Nope. Ugh. No. Screen 2. Okay, here we go. Now can you see it without my notes?
Yeah.
Hooray, I did it. Okay, so I just have there's just two short reports in the agenda today. And they're more for your information than anything else. So the first report is about our water quality monitoring programs. And I wanted to put this in here. I haven't done an update on our water quality programming for a couple of years, I think. And this is the other part of my job as IRCA's water quality scientist, is to manage all of our water monitoring and our research programs. And to be honest, it has been taking up a lot of my brain power recently as we're negotiating some new agreements with different partners and working on various reports. So I wanted to take the time to tell you what it is I do in that other part of my job that's still relevant to source water. So the reason why our monitoring is relevant to source water is because we've identified microcystin as a drinking water threat. So this map here shows you where our different drinking water intakes are. And you can see they're out in Lake St. Clair and in Lake Erie. And in both of those places, we have annual harmful algal blooms, which our drinking water operators need to take into consideration in their treatment operations. So it is a true existing drinking water issue. However, the Clean Water Act doesn't have the tools, nor is it the correct tool for addressing harmful algal blooms. But we do, through our water quality programming, still monitor phosphorus, which is the nutrient that feeds harmful algal blooms. So it's still relevant to what we're doing. So the first thing I want to tell you about is the weekly bulletins that come from NOAA. And I believe I've told you about them before. And if you haven't signed up for them, I very much recommend them. They do weekly bulletins in the spring where they're giving you their forecast for what they expect the bloom severity to be in the summertime. I, as a scientist, find this very, very interesting as they're seeing the data come in and using these various models that they have to predict the severity of the bloom. And then at the end of the season, they give a recap of what actually happened. So in 2020, they were predicting the bloom would be in a severity range of this area, and the severity refers to the actual biomass of the bloom, not its toxicity. And what ended up happening was that we had a bloom of severity 3 on their index scale, which, as you can see, is a lot less than what we've had in some of our previous years. So this is a good news story. But it's not necessarily because of any actions on the ground. It's because we had a drier spring. So we didn't have that same influx of nutrients coming in the springtime. So we'll wait and see what the 2021 prediction is. And I'm curious because as we're monitoring different rain and snowmelt events, and we truly haven't had that many this winter where we normally have been run off of our feet keeping up with rain and snowmelt events by now. So the other big thing that we're working on is this regional phosphorus management plan, which falls under one of the actions in the Canada-Ontario Lake Erie Action Plan. This is funded through Environment Canada, and the idea here is that we gather up a bunch of information about the Essex region, what we know about BMPs, what we know about how phosphorus moves in our soils, and what works here and what doesn't work here, and create a plan for actions specific to the Essex region that we can use here to help us reduce phosphorus. And so the things that work on our farms might not be the same things as work on other farms. We don't have the same topography, so trying to control erosion isn't necessarily what's going to work for us. We know that cover crops are a really good idea in terms of managing phosphorus loss from farms. We also know that cover crops have a ton of challenges for our farmers here because of our typically very wet springs and what that can do to their planting season. So all of that sort of stuff is what we're trying to take into consideration. And the end product is a suggestion and a plan for the actions that we might take. And there's a bit of a structure to this, and we have struck an agricultural working group. We're always interested in more participants on that as well. And Erin will be tapping you to help out with that as well from the greenhouse sector. And we have a research working group. I haven't really got as much into the municipal working group on this. The other thing I noted in that report is just all the different water quality monitoring programs that we do. We're part of the provincial water quality monitoring network, and we have our own surface water that we do our monthly monitoring. We are one of 5 conservation authorities involved in the on-farm program, which was previously GLASI, or the Great Lakes Agricultural Stewardship Initiative. In this project, we intensively monitor the Weigel Creek watershed, and we're trying to really understand nutrient movement in one small watershed and how BMPs might have an impact on that, so best management practices. So we have a very cooperative farmer in Henry Donater who allows us to do some edge of field monitoring at his site. So, and this is something that's part of something much larger, which is really cool to be part of. And we still continue that Kingsville-Leamington project that we've talked about in the past that helps us understand the difference between phosphorus concentrations in our greenhouse and non-greenhouse influence streams. And then we have lots and lots of research partnerships going on. I'm an adjunct professor at the University of Windsor, so I have some graduate students whose committees I'm on, which is really exciting for me and something really cool that I get to do. So these are just a series of maps that show you where we're monitoring water quality, and you can see that we're all around the entire region. We have at least one monitoring location in every watershed. We look at things like chloride and nutrients and TSS, temperature, conductivity, pH, and we monitor at different time intervals. And so these are the stations that we monitor monthly from April to November, and then add on stations that we monitor monthly all year round. And then these ones down here, we monitor every 2 weeks. And then the colored watersheds, we have automated water samplers that allow us to take samples during rain events at an interval of every 4 hours. And those sites where we have those automated samplers will be able to eventually calculate nutrient loads. And you need that more fine scale information in order to be able to do that. So I just have 3 quick slides about sort of what we've learned in all of this. So the Kingsville-Leamington Nutrient Project, we have very clear results that our greenhouse influence streams have much, much higher phosphorus and in the dissolved and total forms than our non-greenhouse influence streams. But not to be fooled that our non-greenhouse influence streams also have very high phosphorus. So all of these levels are very, very high. We did some enhanced monitoring in Sturgeon Creek, where we went up the watershed and took samples at various places. And what this allowed us to do is that it really actually highlighted two stretches where we might see the biggest inputs of phosphorus. So this was really cool work to be able to kind of start to pinpoint where we might want to focus our efforts on phosphorus reduction. The other thing we learned in that, because we did it over multiple seasons, is that the highest total phosphorus concentrations happen in the summertime. And that's important for what I'm going to show you in the next slide. So these are in our greenhouse. This is a heavily greenhouse influenced watershed. So we know highest phosphorus concentrations happen in the summertime when the plants are receiving fertilizer water. And that is in contrast to what we know about an agricultural system where the highest phosphorus concentrations happen in the non-growing season, so over the winter time during events. So the two types of systems are very different. Our management of phosphorus has to be very different in those two different types of systems. That's all I wanted to tell you about our water quality programs. So our resolution on this is just that you receive this report. So I will stop sharing. I can take any questions if you have them, or we can move on the motion.
Yeah, any questions?
Katie, it's
Okay.
Kevin. Those sampling areas that you do in Windsor Essex County, are those results available? Like, are they published at all?
So we're working on how to make our data like easily downloadable. You can request any of the data from us, and we will send them to you. There's no, yeah, they are publicly available, just not easily.
Okay, I'll send you an email request.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sounds good.
Anybody else? So there's a proposed motion to receive. Albert and Cynthia. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay. Thanks very much.
No problem. Let's see if, I did it without any major hiccups. Okay, so the second report is just about our SPC membership and next meeting. So easy peasy. This is just a list of our current membership. As Tom noted, Ian Wilson has been filling in Paul Durka's old position and will be taken on by Kevin Webb when the SPC meets again in April. We have a vacant position here. Justine Taylor left OGVG, and that's where Aaron Korstein comes in. So he will be appointed by the SPA again in April. And we have Ron Barrett and Jean-Marc Beneteau, whose terms are expiring, and we are discussing renewing or potentially having replacement members. So we know for sure that Ron is staying with us, and we're very happy about that. This is our meeting schedule for 2021. So we're meeting today, obviously, and then we're going to meet March 10th, where we'll hear about annual reporting, and that'll be via Zoom as well. And then the next scheduled meeting is not until October, and I hope very much that we're allowed to meet in person. That would be lovely. But if not, we'll continue doing this virtual format, and that's where you'll hear more of the sort of technical work. I will ask that you consider and let us know if the second Wednesday of the month at 4 p.m. is no longer amenable to you. This is the time that the committee has met since its inception, and the time and date is chosen to accommodate mostly for our municipalities and their various municipal meetings. So that is our 2021 meeting schedule. And again, we just have the motion to receive.
Yeah, Albert, moved. Jim, support. Just a couple of things I wanted to mention before we actually do this. The March 10th one is where we'll get sort of a draft report. Sometime before the 1st of April, we will, by default, we'll accept that and send it on to the SPA. But you'll have an opportunity without a meeting to make comments on that or to proposed changes or whatever. It's the same way we did it last year, for those of you who were here last year. So it's the way we'll do it this year. So there is some work for you to do during the end of March, I guess, just so you know. The question about the meeting time and date or day of the week is important, because if new members come on, we need to be able to tell them when the meetings are and see if they fit in with their schedules. So does anybody have any comment on any objection to continuing the way we've been doing it on the second Wednesday at 4? I see a few shaking heads. I see nobody with their hand up, so I guess it's okay. All right, so we'll proceed on that basis. And it's kind of a relief, because it's really difficult to get 15 people to have the same slot of time available on that regular basis. So thank you very much for that. So the motion to receive this report for information, we did have a mover and a seconder, I think. Lisa, are you right? Where'd Lisa go?
Albert moved it and Jim seconded it.
Yeah, I thought we had gotten a motion on the floor, and then I opened my big mouth. Okay, so all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, so the meeting agenda is, or the meeting times are set for the year. That's failing any disaster or something that we would have to meet. So, okay. Does anybody have anything that they would like us to deal with in new business? Okay, not seeing anything. There is no other business. So, motion to adjourn. Tim? Gotcha. And Ron. Okay. Reliable duo there. Okay, thank you very much. All in favor of adjournment? Opposed? Carried. And Olga, I'm sorry I messed up your schedule there, but we got you in. Thanks to Katie.
Thank you.
Okay, we're good, Katie?
Good.
Pull the plug.
Awesome. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a good
Have a
night.
good night, everyone.